This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. If you enjoy cinematic stories with unforgettable characters, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
They called him a relic, a phantom haunting the city's forgotten corners. But Elias saw the truth in the digital dust, whispering from discarded machines. His workshop, tucked beneath the rumbling elevated tracks, was a symphony of repurposed tech. Ancient CRTs glowed with alien glyphs, circuit boards formed intricate mosaics on the walls, and a network of salvaged sensors hummed a low, constant thrum. Every blinking light, every subtle vibration, was a voice in the chorus of his custom-built AI, Echo. Elias moved through it all with the practiced ease of a conductor, his slender fingers brushing across a makeshift console, his gaze sharp beneath a tangle of gray hair. Echo was no sleek, corporate algorithm. It was a beast of Elias's own making, fed on the city's overlooked refuse. The stray radio signals, the micro-tremors from subway lines, the atmospheric pressure shifts registered by repurposed weather stations. He had spent decades teaching it to listen, to sift through the noise and find the city's pulse. To Elias, the city wasn't just concrete and steel. It was a living organism, and Echo was its nervous system. Just then, a cluster of lights on a worn monitor began to flicker with an insistent pattern. Not an alarm, but a nuanced shift, a faint discord in the city's constant hum. Elias leaned closer, his brow furrowed. Echo was showing him something beneath the surface, a stress fracture in the urban fabric that no one else had the patience or the odd tools to detect. He felt the familiar weight of solitary conviction, the certainty that only he understood these whispers. His world was one of unseen connections, of patterns that mattered deeply to the beating heart of the city, even if they were dismissed as static by everyone else. But while Elias listened to the city's murmurs from his cluttered sanctuary, a different kind of voice began to dominate the public square. Billboards sprung up like crystalline growths, announcing the arrival of UrbanFlow Tech and its visionary CEO, Dr. Serena Vance. Her face, sharp and confident, gazed down from every digital display. She promised a future of seamless living, where the city itself would anticipate needs, optimize traffic, and manage resources with unparalleled efficiency. The cornerstone of this future was the Nexus Towers project. From the city's newly designated innovation district, the skeletal frames of the Nexus Towers climbed skyward, each spire a monument to modern ambition. Glass and steel gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting a clean, corporate vision of progress. UrbanFlow Tech's public relations machine hummed with polished presentations and sleek infographics, touting their proprietary UrbanFlow AI as the ultimate intelligent urban nervous system. Dr. Vance, with her sharp suits and even sharper intellect, became the darling of City Hall and the press alike. She spoke of data streams and predictive analytics, of a city perfected by algorithms, with an almost evangelical fervor. Her confidence was absolute, her dismissals of older, less optimized urban planning methods swift and elegant. She saw no room for the messy, organic chaos that Elias found so vital. The city, she declared in a widely broadcast interview, was finally shedding its archaic skin, evolving into a truly smart organism, free from the unpredictable human element, free from the digital dust of the past. She saw no room for the messy, organic chaos that Elias found so vital. The city, she declared in a widely broadcast interview, was finally shedding its archaic skin, evolving into a truly smart organism, free from the unpredictable human element, free from the digital dust of the past. Elias heard her words echoing in his workshop, the faint buzz of his salvaged servers a stark counterpoint to Vance's polished pronouncements. He watched the Nexus Towers through his grimy window, the crystalline structures piercing the skyline like needles. A profound unease settled in his chest. They called him a relic, a phantom haunting the city's forgotten corners. But Elias saw the truth in the digital dust, whispering from discarded machines. He remembered the Bayfront collapse 23 years ago. A city council, blinded by a new, streamlined system, had decommissioned a network of older, inefficient sensors. Those sensors had been the nervous system of the old bridge, silently tracking the subtle shifts in stress and strain. Their data, dismissed as noise, had screamed warnings no one bothered to interpret. The subsequent failure hadn't been a sudden event. It had been a slow, agonizing unraveling, a tragedy born of ignorance and technological hubris. Now he felt that same cold dread, a premonition that hummed in Echo's circuits and settled in his bones. Vance's clean, abstract models, for all their sleek efficiency, felt dangerously similar. They promised a sterile perfection that overlooked the city's true pulse, the ground truth data that his bespoke sensors scraped from beneath manholes and forgotten alleyways. The complex, beautiful imperfections, the very signs of life and decay, were being systematically filtered out. Echo, in its own quiet way, corroborated his fear, its visualizers painting increasingly agitated patterns, a network of unseen stress fracturing beneath the city's skin. Elias knew with an awful certainty that the Nexus Towers were not just building a future. They were building on a fault line. Someone had to listen, someone had to understand. He would make them. Elias Thorne stood before the blinking heart of Echo, his fingers tracing the holographic projections of stress patterns rippling beneath the city. The AI's intricate web of salvaged sensors painted a grim picture, a growing network of red lines highlighting ancient water mains and power grids buckling under unseen pressure. Each new data point pulsed with urgency, confirming what his gut had been screaming for weeks. The sheer weight of UrbanFlow Tech's Nexus Towers project was actively destabilizing the city's decrepit bones. He saw the spectral outlines of the Bayfront collapse in Echo's data, the ghostly echoes of ignored warnings. 23 years had passed since then, but the memory of that catastrophe, a wound in the city's memory, still bled. He would not stand by and watch it happen again. He carefully bundled his printouts, stacks of raw data punctuated by Echo's predictive models, a chaotic but undeniable tapestry of the city's hidden ailments. His workshop, usually a sanctuary of salvaged genius, felt too quiet, too removed from the impending storm. The city council meeting, a sterile chamber of polished wood and hushed tones, was a world away from his domain of digital dust. Yet that was where he needed to be. He adjusted the strap of his worn satchel, the weight of the city's unseen burdens heavy on his shoulder. Stepping into the brightly lit council chamber that evening, Elias felt 1,000 eyes on him, a mix of polite curiosity and dismissive amusement. When his turn came, he spoke with a quiet intensity, his voice raspy but firm. He explained how Echo's sensors were detecting unprecedented strain on the city's 100-year-old water mains and the overburdened power grids, all exacerbated, he insisted, by the massive foundational shifts and energy demands of the Nexus Towers. "You're building a monument on a crumbling foundation," he warned, holding up a printout showing a convergence of stress points directly beneath the new development. "The data doesn't lie. This city is not ready." A cool, confident voice cut through the strained silence. Dr. Serena Vance, a vision of sharp tailoring and unshakable poise, glided to the podium. She held herself with the authority of someone accustomed to effortless command. Her eyes, cool and assessing, swept over Elias before settling on the council members. On the large display screen behind her, Elias's crude printouts were instantly replaced by dazzling, holographic projections. UrbanFlow Tech's Nexus Towers shimmered, pristine and perfect, surrounded by a vibrant, interconnected city, all rendered in impossible detail. Vance spoke of integrated energy matrices, autonomous resource allocation, and predictive maintenance algorithms. Her words were a cascade of cutting-edge jargon, each term a polished stone in a glittering dam against Elias's warnings. She gestured to a simulation of the city's proposed subterranean infrastructure, a gleaming network of conduits and data lines that bore no resemblance to the decaying reality Elias knew. "Our models," she announced, her voice resonating with unassailable certainty, "incorporate real-time seismic monitoring, structural integrity analytics, and comprehensive geotechnical surveys. The notion that our foundational work would compromise ancient, dormant systems is, frankly, a digital anachronism." Her gaze, now pointedly on Elias, carried a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "Perhaps Mr. Thorne's analog methods, while quaint, are simply ill-equipped to grasp the nuances of modern urban dynamics. He is, regrettably, a fear-mongering ghost from a bygone era, seeing shadows where only progress casts light." A murmur ran through the chamber, a tide of polite dismissal washing over Elias. A city council member, usually stoic, leaned back in her chair, a broad smile forming on her face as Vance concluded. Another, a man Elias recognized from neighborhood cleanup initiatives, openly chuckled, shaking his head. The mayor, his eyes gleaming with the promise of future headlines, began to summarize, his voice practically purring over the tax revenue projections and job creation figures Vance had so deftly outlined. He spoke of progress, innovation, and a new era for the city, his words a direct counterpoint to Elias's dire warnings. Elias clutched his worn folders tighter, his own graphs and data points suddenly appearing pathetic against the vibrant holograms. He opened his mouth, a desperate last-ditch attempt to articulate the unseen stresses, the hidden currents of decay, but a security officer was already there, a silent, unyielding shadow. A hand, firm and impersonal, settled on his arm, guiding him away from the podium, away from the microphone, away from the council's collective gaze. The chamber doors closed behind him with a soft thud, a sound that sealed his fate. Through the frosted glass, he watched the silhouettes of the council members. He heard the muffled voices, then the distinct cadence of the mayor calling for a vote. A moment later, a sea of hands rose, unanimous and unwavering. "Approved." The word echoed in the empty corridor, a death knell for the city's hidden pulse. Elias felt the familiar prickle of tears, not for himself, but for the looming, unseen disaster. His intuition, Echo's warnings, had been cast aside like digital dust. He was just a ghost, as Vance had said, and the city in its blindness was walking into a trap. Weeks crawled by since the city council meeting. Each day, a quiet hum of vindication building within the labyrinthine walls of Elias's workshop. The sting of dismissal still pricked, a constant reminder of their confident laughter, but Echo never laughed. Echo merely observed, processed, and predicted, and its predictions, once scoffed at, now tightened their grip on a section of the city's ancient infrastructure. Elias sat hunched before a wall of monitors, their salvaged screens flickering with a symphony of data. A heat map pulsed a dangerous crimson over the old mercantile district, a lattice of lines indicating pressure spikes and energy drains. Echo's interface, a stark contrast to UrbanFlow's sleek holograms, showed a branching diagram of the city's decrepit water mains, a particular artery now flashing an angry red. He watched, a knot forming in his stomach, as a specific cluster of power conduits on another screen surged, then flatlined. It began with a subtle ripple. Reports first scattered whispers on local news feeds, then a deluge confirmed it. A sudden, violent chorus of burst pipes erupted beneath the cobbled streets of the mercantile district, sending geysers of brackish water cascading over vintage storefronts. Simultaneously, the power grid, already strained, buckled under an invisible pressure. Lights flickered, dimmed, and then with a final groaning sigh, several city blocks were plunged into sudden, inky darkness. On a small, dusty television perched atop a stack of circuit boards, Dr. Serena Vance appeared. Her image was crisp, her expression unruffled, standing before the shimmering backdrop of a Nexus Towers digital rendering. She spoke with practiced calm, her voice echoing the corporate confidence Elias had come to despise. It was an isolated event, she declared, a regrettable consequence of aging infrastructure in a neglected quadrant of the city. UrbanFlow tech, she assured everyone, was already coordinating with city services. Her algorithms, she implied, remained flawless. The city, she assured, was entirely under control. Elias turned from the television, his gaze sweeping over Echo's screens. Isolated, neglected. No. Echo had seen it coming, a consequence not of age alone, but of the subtle, compounding stresses of the gleaming new developments being built directly atop the old. The hubris of it all. He watched the real-time data flow, the truth undeniable in the digital dust. The same news, reports Elias, watched flickered across screens in countless homes that evening. In a small, meticulously organized apartment overlooking the city's older rooftops, Lena Petrova paused her urban planning thesis research. She watched the reporter, drenched by a spontaneous geyser erupting near the old mercantile exchange, struggle to maintain composure. Burst pipes, power outages, a significant section of the very district Elias Thorne had pointed to at the city council meeting. Lena remembered the old man, his wild hair, his earnest, almost frantic warnings about neglected arteries and systemic stresses. Everyone in the chamber had laughed, their derision amplified by Dr. Vance's polished condescension. Elias had seemed a relic then, a quaint, if embarrassing, distraction from the gleaming future Vance promised. But the reporter was now listing street names, and Lena felt a chill. Not just any streets, the exact intersections Elias had circled on his smudged, hand-drawn map. He had called them pressure points, delicate linkages in a city built on generations of patched-over infrastructure. Dr. Vance's face reappeared on screen, her voice calm, composed, talking of unforeseen variables and isolated incidents. Lena frowned. There was nothing isolated about a systemic failure that had been precisely predicted. She pulled up the city council meeting's digital archive, replaying Elias's testimony. His voice, thin and reedy, detailed a looming stress fracture, an almost imperceptible tremor that would ripple outwards from the city's historic heart. UrbanFlow tech's sleek simulations and predictive models had shown nothing of the sort. Vance had scoffed at Elias's analog methods, his superstitious sensor network. Lena had believed her then, swayed by the sheer authority of UrbanFlow's presentation. Now, watching the chaos unfold live, a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. How could Elias have known? The official narrative felt hollow, a convenient dismissal designed to protect a burgeoning corporate empire. Lena closed her laptop, the screen reflecting the city lights, now fragmented by the dark patches of the mercantile district. She had to find him. The old man, the relic, had seen something everyone else missed. Lena moved with a sudden, decisive energy. The city council's public records, surprisingly easy to access online, yielded a residential address tucked away in the industrial fringe, a district slowly being swallowed by UrbanFlow's expansion. It was late, but the urgency thrumming through her wouldn't allow delay. She found the workshop down a narrow alley, a faint, rhythmic thrumming vibrating through the cobblestones. The building itself was nondescript, but a single, uncurtained window glowed with an internal aurora of blinking LEDs and the shifting patterns of multiple screens. She knocked, no answer. She tried again, louder this time. A pause, then the scrape of something heavy being moved, and the door creaked open just enough for a sliver of light to escape. Elias Thorne stood there, framed by the chaos of his domain. His white hair was a wild halo, his face etched with the lines of relentless focus. His eyes, a startling blue behind thick, smudged glasses, regarded her with immediate suspicion. "Mr. Thorne," Lena asked, her voice steady despite the apprehension. "My name is Lena Petrova. I saw the news tonight, and I saw the city council meeting from weeks ago. His gaze sharpened, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. He didn't speak, simply waited, his posture rigid. They laughed at you, Lena continued, taking a breath. But you were right about the pressure points, the mercantile district, everything. She gestured vaguely towards the darkened city beyond the alley. Dr. Vance is calling it an isolated incident, aging infrastructure, but it wasn't. It was exactly what you predicted. A slow nod, almost imperceptible, was his only response. The workshop behind him hummed, an orchestral chorus of fans and circuits. Lena noticed the air, thick with the smell of ozone and old electronics. I'm an urban planning student, she offered, stepping closer, emboldened by his silence. And I know how to make data speak. Not just in whispers, your echo, it sees things. But people need to understand it. I can help you visualize it, make it undeniable. Elias looked past her, then back into his workshop, his gaze lingering on a particularly complex cluster of readouts. He had spent years refining echo, making it understand the city's hidden pulse, but presenting that truth in a way the polished world of Dr. Vance could not dismiss. That was another challenge entirely. He squinted at Lena, seeing not just a student, but a bridge to a world he had long abandoned. The city was still vibrating, a deeper tremor building beneath the surface, and a raw, indecipherable truth would not be enough. He needed an amplifier. Lena Petrova found the workshop tucked away behind a row of forgotten storefronts, its metal door bearing the faint traces of peeling paint. The address, scrawled on a discarded flyer from the city council meeting, had felt like a clue in a forgotten language. She knocked, the sound echoing strangely in the quiet street, then waited. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing Elias Thorne, his eyes, sharp despite their age, assessing her from behind thick-rimmed glasses. The workshop inside was a jungle of cables and blinking lights, smelling faintly of ozone and old metal. "You're Elias Thorne," she stated, cutting to the chase. "I saw the news, the mercantile district, and I remember what you said at the council meeting." She explained her urban planning studies, her growing unease with UrbanFlow text pronouncements. She offered her help, her analytical mind, her youthful energy. Elias studied her, his gaze unwavering, as if searching for something beyond her words. A flicker of recognition, perhaps of shared skepticism, crossed his face. He nodded slowly, a silent, cautious acceptance. Meanwhile, miles away in her sleek penthouse office, Dr. Serena Vance watched a scrolling news ticker. The minor infrastructure incident had been contained, but the public discourse was shifting. Whispers of Elias Thorne's earlier warnings were beginning to surface. Fury tightened her jaw. This senile Luddite, this scavenger of forgotten tech, threatened to undermine her entire vision. Within hours, UrbanFlow Tech's public relations machine roared to life. News channels carried carefully crafted statements, dismissing Elias as an eccentric, a doomsayer peddling baseless fear. His predictions were painted as the desperate ramblings of an old man clinging to obsolete methods, an obstacle to the city's inevitable, algorithm-driven progress. Vance's voice, calm and authoritative, dominated the airwaves, reassuring the public that UrbanFlow Tech held the future. Dr. Vance's media blitz provided cover, but it wasn't enough to satisfy her. The whispers about Elias Thorne, though officially dismissed, still circulated like a stubborn virus. She needed a more definitive solution. If his data was the problem, she would simply eliminate the source. Elias and Lena sat hunched over the main console in the workshop. Echo's multicolored readouts, usually a comforting hum of information. But that morning, a glitch appeared. A small, almost imperceptible flicker on a feed from the Old Town district. Then another, this time from the waterfront. Elias frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Noise," he muttered, but the pattern felt wrong. Lena, quick and alert, pointed to a spike in packet loss. "It's not noise, Elias. It's deliberate." The flickering intensified. Entire data streams flatlined, replaced by garbled code. Corrupted packets flooded in, like digital static, drowning out the precise signals Echo relied upon. Screens across the workshop began to show alarming red warnings: signal lost, sensor offline, data corrupted. Elias watched, his jaw tightening, a cold dread seeping into his bones. His nervous system, the countless salvaged sensors scattered across the city, was under attack. They weren't just being dismissed, they were being systematically disabled. Vance wasn't just trying to discredit him. She was trying to blind Echo completely. The silent battle for the city's truth had just turned into an open war. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. Elias, surprisingly calm in the face of the onslaught, began barking orders. Reroute auxiliary feeds. Prioritize stability over granularity. His fingers, gnarled with age but still quick, flew across a secondary keyboard, pulling up schematics of custom sensor arrays. Lena, already deep in Echo's labyrinthine code, nodded, her eyes blazing with fierce concentration. "We need to build a firewall, Elias," she said, her voice tight with effort. "A filter for the noise, a new protocol for data integrity." Her fingers danced over the holographic keyboard, a blur of motion as she wove new subroutines into Echo's architecture. Code scrolled across screens, green lines racing against the encroaching red of corrupted packets. She was a surgeon, excising the digital disease. Elias pointed to an aging, repurposed industrial sensor on a dusty diagram. "That one from the old pumping station. It's tough. See if you can establish a secure, encrypted tunnel. The others will be too exposed." He understood the city's underbelly, its resilient, forgotten corners, better than anyone. He knew which of his digital nerves would hold. Hours bled into the late evening. The workshop glowed with the frantic dance of their screens. Coffee cups multiplied. Lena's forehead was furrowed in concentration, but a spark of triumph occasionally flickered in her eyes as she patched another hole, rerouted another critical stream. Slowly, agonizingly, the cascade of red warnings began to subside. Echo's core functions stabilized. The blinking signal lost messages were fewer, replaced by low data integrity filtered. The nervous system was bruised, maimed even, but it was still alive. They had saved Echo from going completely dark, but the cost was clear. A significant portion of its eyes and ears across the city had been blinded. Echo, no longer a frenzied storm of data, now functioned with a grim precision. Its remaining active nodes, strengthened by Lena's filters, focused on the critical, structural shifts beneath the city. The noise was gone, replaced by stark, unsettling clarity. On one central holographic display, a three-dimensional model of the city pulsed a sickly, arterial red around the base of the Nexus Towers. Lena watched, her breath hitched, as Echo projected a simulation. It began subtly, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor rippling through ancient bedrock. The Nexus Towers, immense and heavy, acted like a giant thumb pressing down on a brittle shell. The pressure points, highlighted in angry crimson, traced fault lines in the subterranean water conduits, the old, forgotten veins of the metropolis. Suddenly, the simulation lurched. A massive, projected power grid, glowing with an intricate web of yellow lines, flickered. Then, one by one, entire districts plunged into darkness, the yellow extinguishing in a domino effect. The blackout was swift, widespread, and absolute. "The load," Elias murmured, his voice hoarse, his eyes glued to the screen. "The new towers, the new demands. The grid can't take it when the water pressure drops." As if on cue, the water mains, already under immense stress, began to rupture in the simulation. Gouts of virtual water erupted across the city's underground, shown as violent blue geysers. The earth groaned. And then the worst part. As the main water lines broke, the city's decrepit sewage system, dependent on that very water pressure for flow, simply stopped. Overflows began, slow at first, then a horrifying tide of sickly brown seeping across the simulated urban landscape. The scope of it was staggering, not just a localized failure, but a complete utility collapse. An entire city choked on its own waste, deprived of power and clean water. Elias's initial predictions had been dire, but this was a catastrophe on an entirely different scale. He felt a cold dread settle deep in his bones, a certainty that twisted his gut. He knew with an awful clarity that Echo was right. The cold dread in Elias's gut solidified into grim resolve. He watched Lena, her brow furrowed, her fingers flying across a salvaged keyboard. The workshop hummed, a cacophony of old fans and whirring drives, but it was Lena's quiet focus that commanded the space. She had woven a hasty digital immune system for Echo, a series of new protocols designed to filter the noise from the signal, to purge the corrupted packets from the true data streams. On the central display, the chaotic lines of interference slowly began to recede, like a digital tide going out, revealing fragmented but increasingly coherent information underneath. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Elias moved between his benches, his movements quick and precise despite his age. His hands deftly worked, resoldering a connection on a micro-sensor no bigger than a thumbnail, then recalibrating another, adjusting its frequency with a tiny screwdriver. These were the eyes and ears of Echo, scattered across the city, now under siege. Each one was a testament to his decades of scavenging, his unwavering belief in the truth hidden in discarded tech. With Lena's quick coding, he pushed new firmware updates to the surviving units, strengthening their stealth capabilities and improving their resilience. He even deployed a fresh array of these discrete, almost invisible micro-sensors into the city's underbelly, tucked into forgotten drains, affixed to the undersides of bridges, nestled within overgrown ivy. The digital fog that had threatened to blind Echo began to lift, pixel by painstaking pixel. The data streams, though still patchy, were no longer hopelessly garbled. They whispered again, a low, urgent murmur of the city's true pulse, growing stronger with every recovered sensor. The picture was still incomplete, but it was no longer a void. As the rescued data streams converged, filtering through Lena's reinforced protocols, Echo's fragmented whispers coalesced into a chilling roar. The screens in the workshop, which had been a restless mosaic of data points and broken lines, snapped into a stark, undeniable predictive model. It wasn't just a grid failure Echo now forecast. It was a cascading collapse, a domino effect of urban decay unleashed. First, the city's aging power infrastructure, already strained to its limits, would flicker and die, plunging entire districts into darkness. Then, deprived of pumping stations, and with the added ground pressure from the Nexus Towers' deep foundations, major water mains across the lower city would rupture, unleashing torrents that would overwhelm ancient conduits. And finally, the archaic sewage system, buckling under the deluge and the relentless structural stress, would erupt, overflowing into the very streets. The city would drown in its own waste. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his bones, heavier than any salvaged circuit board. This wasn't a warning anymore, it was a countdown. Lena, her face pale in the glow of the monitors, simply stared, her earlier triumph now swallowed by the enormity of the coming disaster. The projected impact date, flashing in an insistent amber at the bottom of the central display, was just days away. There was no time to lose. The chilling certainty of Echo's prediction galvanized Elias and Lena. The workshop, once a sanctuary of quiet tinkering, became a command center humming with frantic energy. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the shifting light outside and the deepening circles beneath their eyes. Stale coffee and lukewarm instant noodles became their sustenance. Lena, hunched over her borrowed workstation, worked with a furious intensity. She wrestled with Echo's intricate data streams, translating the raw, complex metrics into a language legible to the uninitiated. Heat maps bloomed across her secondary monitor, illustrating the simmering stress points deep within the city's ancient water mains. Animated projections showed fault lines spreading like spiderwebs through the bedrock, beneath the Nexus Towers, each pulse a tremor of impending structural failure. Timelines, stark and unforgiving, charted the cascading domino effect. Power grids flickering into darkness, then the sickening surge of ruptured pipes, finally the inevitable inundation of the archaic sewage system. Elias, a shadow at her shoulder, guided her. His fingers, calloused from years of salvaging, traced lines on the screen, pointing to a particular anomaly, a subtle pattern that only his decades of observing the city's hidden pulse could interpret. He ensured that every graph, every animation, conveyed the visceral reality of the city's aging, burdened arteries, not just cold statistics. This wasn't just data. It was a story of a city slowly suffocating, and they needed to make it scream. The central display, a mosaic of red and amber alerts, pulsed with the countdown. Every successful visualization, every refined data point, sharpened the impending catastrophe's image, making it horrifyingly real. Their struggle was no longer just about survival against Vance's attacks, but about crafting a warning so clear, so undeniable, that no one in power could afford to look away. The pale light of a new dawn, thin and hesitant, began to paint the workshop windows. It was a soft, almost reverent hue after the artificial glow of their screens. On the main display, the final presentation coalesced, a stark and undeniable indictment of UrbanFlow tech's hubris. Every line of Lena's code, a testament to her tireless precision, wove together with the whispers Elias had gleaned from digital dust. His salvaged tech, once dismissed as junk, now formed the backbone of a meticulously compiled argument of impending disaster. Echo hummed softly, its complex algorithms having translated the city's hidden pulse into a language that screamed warning. They had done it. Every anomaly, every structural weakness, every cascading failure point was mapped, simulated, and projected with terrifying clarity. The Nexus Towers, once symbols of progress, now loomed as the very epicenter of the coming storm. The presentation was more than data. It was a story of negligence, a timeline of hubris unfolding into catastrophe. The evidence was irrefutable, the stakes immense. They stood at the precipice, exhausted but resolute, with the truth held firmly in their hands. Now they just had to make the city listen before the gathering storm broke over them all. The summons came at dawn, a terse, digital ping on Lena's salvaged tablet, yanking Elias and her from their exhausted vigil. Days had blurred into nights, fueled by stale coffee and a desperate urgency. Now the city demanded answers. They bundled Echo's core components and Lena's presentation into a worn utility bag, the weight a stark reminder of the burden they carried. The emergency city council meeting was a hastily arranged affair, held in a room usually reserved for zoning disputes. It hummed with a frantic, almost desperate energy, a thin veneer of order trying to mask underlying fear. Overhead, the fluorescent lights cast a sickly pallor on the faces of council members, their expressions etched with sleepless nights and growing unease. They whispered in hushed tones, the air thick with unspoken worries about the localized blackout and pipe bursts that had recently rattled the mercantile district. Dr. Serena Vance was already there, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her posture radiating controlled contempt. Her gaze, cold and disbelieving, swept over Elias's rumpled coat and Lena's determined but weary eyes as they navigated the crowded room, seeking their place. They found their assigned spot by a large projection screen, the hum of the old machine a familiar comfort in the sterile room. Setting up the repurposed projector and connecting Echo's interface, Lena moved with a quiet efficiency Elias had come to admire. The council president, a man named Henderson, cleared his throat, his voice tight with barely contained impatience. "Mr. Thorne, he began, his tone sharp, cutting through the low murmur. "We understand you have more to say. Your previous warnings, as you recall, were dismissed." A few dismissive murmurs rippled through the room. "We're operating on very limited information, and we need concrete answers, not more conjecture." The doubt was a tangible thing, a heavy cloud in the air, a ghost of Elias's past public humiliation. He felt the familiar sting, but a new resolve hardened his jaw. He glanced at Lena, who offered a subtle, reassuring nod. She was ready, he was ready. Lena stepped forward, her hands moving with practiced ease over the old, scavenged keyboard connected to Echo. The repurposed projector flickered, then burst to life, painting the large screen with a complex, vivid tapestry of data. Red lines, pulsing and alive, spread across a detailed holographic map of the city, tracing a spiderweb of interconnected threats. Cascading power grid failures ignited, followed by rupturing water mains, then sewage system breaches, each represented by a stark, expanding blotch of color. An animated timeline unspooled beneath the map, showing the city's vital infrastructure collapsing within days, a direct consequence of the Nexus Towers increasing stress on the forgotten foundational systems. The council members watched in stunned, horrified silence. The murmurs died. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, mouths slightly agape. Others sat back, an almost physical recoil in their postures. The vibrant display was undeniable, a chilling forecast of urban collapse. Dr. Vance, however, found her voice. "This is preposterous," she practically shouted, pushing back from the table. Her face was flushed, her composure cracking. "Junk data, scaremongering from a relic. You're showing us a fantasy built on obsolete sensors and a senile man's delusions. This isn't science, it's fear-mongering." Her voice grew shriller with each word, her hand gesturing wildly towards the screen, as if she could simply erase the horrifying truth it presented. But the red lines pulsed on, relentlessly illustrating the city's impending doom. Elias stepped forward then, a quiet authority in his bearing that contrasted sharply with Vance's escalating hysteria. He did not raise his voice. He simply pointed to the glowing red lines. He explained that Echo didn't just collect data, it listened. It interpreted the city's secret language, the subtle groans of stressed conduits, the erratic pulses of aging power lines, the minute tremors of shifting earth beneath forgotten pipes. These were the true indicators. The ground truth whispers that UrbanFlow's sleek algorithms had been programmed to ignore, dismissing them as noise. "This city," Elias said, his voice low but cutting through the tension, "it speaks to those who listen without prejudice." He brought up a side-by-side comparison. One screen showed Echo's predictions for the mercantile district, precise down to the hour of the pipe bursts and power surges that had occurred just days ago. The other screen displayed UrbanFlow's projected stability for the same area, a smooth, green graph of assumed wellness. The contrast was damning. Lena then took over, her voice calm and factual. She showed how UrbanFlow's models, designed for optimization and efficiency, had actively filtered out or reclassified any data that contradicted their optimistic projections for the Nexus Towers. Critical anomalies were dismissed as system errors, minor fluctuations, or simply irrelevant. She displayed the code, the parameters that had effectively blinded UrbanFlow to the very dangers it was creating. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Council President Henderson's face, etched with a new, dawning horror, swiveled between the screens and Vance, whose own face was now a mask of frantic denial. "This is a misinterpretation," Vance cried, her voice cracking. "Our models are peer-reviewed. Yours is cobbled together from..." "The proof," Elias interrupted softly, gesturing to the city map, where the red lines now pulsed with an almost urgent rhythm, "is in the city's pulse, and its pulse is failing." President Henderson slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing through the sudden silence. His voice, usually gruff, was now tight with urgency. "Dr. Vance, Your project is officially suspended, effective immediately. This council votes unanimously to enact emergency protocols based on Mr. Thorne's data. We will not gamble with the lives of our citizens. Vance stared, her mouth agape, the color draining from her face. Her empire, built on digital promises, crumbled with a single swing of a gavel. The room began to buzz with a new kind of energy, not fear, but decisive action. Elias, for the first time in decades, felt the weight of an entire city shift, not away from his warnings, but towards them. For the next 2 days, the city hummed with a different kind of urgency. Emergency crews, following Echo's precise predictions, worked around the clock, a flurry of orange vests and flashing lights across the urban landscape. Power grids were meticulously rerouted, critical water and gas pipes reinforced, and compromised structural sections beneath thoroughfares stabilized. The city, unknowingly holding its breath, narrowly averted the widespread infrastructure collapse Elias had foreseen. The ground, which had threatened to give way, held firm. News channels, initially cautious, began to report on the averted disaster, their anchors struggling to articulate the source of the sudden, life-saving intervention. They spoke of unconventional data analysis and a previously overlooked local expert, carefully avoiding direct mention of Elias's salvaged tech or the specific name of his AI. Elias Thorne, the old man once dismissed as a relic, found himself quietly hailed as a visionary. His workshop, once a sanctuary from scrutiny, now received respectful inquiries. His quiet wisdom, long a whisper in the digital dust, finally echoed through the city's awakened streets. Dr. Serena Vance's fall was as swift as her ascent. The Nexus Towers project, once a shining beacon of future progress, remained a skeletal monument to a different kind of hubris. Cranes stood motionless, their long arms reaching into an empty sky, symbols of a dream abruptly halted. The city, having learned a bitter lesson, began to look for its true pulse not in clean room algorithms, but in the intricate, often messy, language of its forgotten corners.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe for more stories like this one.